Hello everyone, long time no see. My name is Lewis and welcome back to Deep Dive, Christmas edition, where we'll be looking at cinema's biggest product in the world, the newest release of the Avatar series, Fire and Ash. You all know what Avatar is, I don't have to explain it. If you were around in the late 2000s, you recall how the release of Avatar was the biggest thing, the biggest technological leap that cinema had ever encountered. And it still surprises me to this day of how big a thing Avatar is, how big a thing it became. It's quite rare that an original IP manages to become as successful as Avatar became. The idea is so on the precipice of being an embarrassing failure, something that people wouldn't really be able to take that seriously. How many original worlds have we seen? How many pet projects have there been by people like Zack Snyder and even Francis Ford Coppola that have been catastrophic failures? They all failed while Avatar was the most successful film of all time, all based around 9-foot blue people in James Cameron's completely fantastical imagination. And so yes, it still surprises me that when I saw Avatar: The Way of Water, over a decade after the original Avatar came out, I assumed that Avatar was going to be this blip, this one-off thing that it would never really be able to replicate, because the reason that people were interested in Avatar was what it meant to the cinematic landscape. We were watching a new echelon of technological, computer-generated filmmaking. And it didn't really feel that by the time The Way of Water came out, that we were deserving for the next generational leap, which is what Avatar has become synonymous with. But here we are with Fire and Ash, the third film of James Cameron's now passion project. And lo and behold, Avatar: The Way of Water makes over $2 billion at the box office. It's in the top 5 highest earning films of all time. But again, it never really felt like it. I didn't feel as though it was a cultural shift, because when the first Avatar came out, it was that everyone spoke about it, everyone had an opinion on it, even if the only discussion point was this idea that, oh, look at what cinema now is. I've never seen this before. People weren't really talking about the narrative, they weren't talking about the thematics, they were talking exclusively on the technology, and that was what sold Avatar. And so to see it now, almost a generation separate from the original, to see it still have this sway over people, it's going to make billions upon billions at the box office. It still seems as though this is a kind of marketing that works and people do want to see it. And I am one of those people. Avatar's a weird one because I like it. And I don't know why. I shouldn't like it. Everything about Avatar is something that I should be against, but I enjoy them for what they are. I would go as far to say that they might be good films. Not across the board. There's elements in them that are terrible, but I will be an ardent defender of Avatar for more than just the obvious reasons that, oh, you know, I'm happy that something original, like an original vision, is in cinemas. It goes more than that. I think, and I'm sure I'll get around to speaking about Avatar as a film at some point, but I really think that what Avatar is, even more so than something like Star Wars, I don't really feel as though it's contained within the realm of cinema the way other blockbuster films are. Because think about it. When we watch a film, we're trying to determine, okay, how successful is it within the certain niches of filmmaking, within the certain nuances of that language or the mise-en-scène. That's how we evaluate if something's good. But Avatar, the Avatar films, they are attempting so much more outside of the realm of cinema. What they're really seeking the barometers of success by is not what a traditional film is looking to garner any kind of achievement in. They're so large in their scale and their scope and their spectacle that the majority of stuff that it's trying to do isn't what you're really looking for in the lens of cinema. And so I do kind of see Avatar as this kind of separate blockbuster thing that's closer to those rides that you would go on at Universal Studios and Disney that are all about promoting the new technology, this new medium of an experience of cinema. And not in the same way that someone like Abel Gance looked at it when he was making Napoleon, of trying to usher in a new language for the medium of the 20th century. I think that ultimately Avatar is looking towards the medium of the 21st century and what that will mean, but that isn't exclusively cinema, because so much of the cinematic language is kind of disregarded in this film. If you're looking at this film to learn about filmmaking, if you're looking at the Avatar films to learn about blocking and cinematography, most of the image is completely fabricated, and there's so much going on that even to just keep track of the editing or the sound design, we know that filmmaking is a collective effort, but I'm sure that James Cameron has a creative vision for these films, but it's so big, there are so many moving parts in it that you have to concede this is way more of a collective effort than an auteur's vision. I do believe that James Cameron's vision is central to Avatar, and even his idea of creating the world of Pandora and what the Na'vi are and the story of Avatar, that does stem from him. But that is just a small segment of what Avatar is. It's the minority. The majority of the experience of Avatar is based around these film workers and these technicians that are making something once conceived as logistically impossible and bringing that to fruition. That's what you're going to see Avatar for. And it's interesting watching it because obviously I saw Avatar when it came out, but I didn't see the sequel until just last week. And when I watched the films back to back, I watched them again with my wife. And then I started to question, because I enjoyed them, okay, is this also because I'm enjoying them in an experience where I'm at home, I'm able to talk with my wife, we're able to talk as the film is going on, we're enjoying it for what it is, but we are also laughing at it because Avatar's quite ridiculous. So I wondered if my enjoyment was just more of a personal, subjective one, and that when I had to go in the cinema and sit quietly for over 3 hours and just engage in the film, would I find it a bit dull? Maybe it's just me. But for some reason, and I don't even know why, I enjoy Avatar. And I'm not even that particularly drawn in towards the technological aspects of it, although most people are. One thing that happened that was interesting when you're watching Fire and Ash is that my wife nudged me and she just kind of pointed to look around. And this was during the climax of the film. And when you're looking at other people, I'm looking at the normal viewing public, and they really were. They were sat looking at the screen with this kind of awe. They were awestruck at what they were seeing. And I understand why. Because when you look at that finale, I was watching it, and I even thought, how do you direct something like this? How can you even describe the ending, the climax of this film? If I describe the climax of this film to you now, it would be so gargantuan and so over the top that you would think that's just going to appear as a mess on screen. I can tell you the ending. There is an anti-gravitational vortex that's going on in the background, destroying the whole world next to a tornado of fire, while two Na'vi, one of whom has gone over to a new sect that are known as the Ash People, are fighting with one another. He has donned himself in this kind of savage native attire as he's kind of going into this heart of darkness kind of route. Meanwhile, the dreadlocked shirtless human, who is actually the Na'vi's son, but it's his son from the human's body, although the human is now dead and his memories have been implanted into the military Na'vi, are fighting on these floating platforms reminiscent of the final level of the first Half-Life. That's the ending. And so just to watch it, the whole point is it's just a spectacle. I mean, James Cameron is good at directing action, but I sometimes question it because when I'm watching something like Fire and Ash, I still think to myself, what is this technology? I mean, on a literal level, if someone can describe the technology that I'm seeing, please, anyone that specializes in special effects, let me know about how this is made, because 90% of the film is just all computer generated. The majority of the film, nothing that you see on screen is real. The closest bit of reality that you have is the motion capturing of the Na'vi, and it is undeniably impressive. There was a scene, one of the Na'vi leaders who's in the film for one scene, just based on his voice and how his mouth articulated, how his mouth moved, I thought to myself, just looking at him, that is the Na'vi version of David Thewlis. And I was right. And I then have to give props to the technology. It's not as though it's just taking the bones and the movements of a human being and just creating something completely artificial. It is showing you how that person would look if they were a Na'vi. Because David Thewlis was disguising his accent. but I could still recognize just in his face, in his mouth, that it was him. The technology is undeniably impressive. I might say that ultimately I do disagree with the artistic philosophy that allows David Cameron to... David Cameron? I might disagree with the artistic philosophy that allows James Cameron to create this world. I don't know if it ultimately benefits the entirety of cinema, but I'm not inherently against it. It would be the equivalent of saying that music should never be made electronically, which I don't believe. I think there's always space for a film like this, and I think if you want to go all out and create a film that is completely artificial, but still with that creative human force behind it, articulating it, I think clearly there's space for that. But we should probably talk about Avatar as a film, because what Avatar was, as I've said, was a one-off. And it was that for the longest time until James Cameron came forth and stated that he wanted to make more. He had this idea that it was going to be a 5-part series of films, which it looks as though he will finally achieve that goal. But what we have now from a storytelling perspective is Avatar approaching itself in almost a chapter-like structure. Whereas the original Avatar was its own self-contained story, what we're finding, especially with the last two, is that James Cameron is delivering us these small tableaus, almost these like miniature contained adventures within Avatar that are kind of self-contained within one larger story. The question is, does this make the world of Pandora more interesting? And I think it does. I think that the world of Avatar, if it is going to benefit from anything, it would be expanding the world. And this is what we saw with The Way of Water, and this is what we're continuing to see in Fire and Ash. Fire and Ash essentially picks off where the previous film left off. We're following Jake Sully and his family as they're continuing to fight off humanity. However, this time we're introduced to a newer aspect of the Na'vi, which is the savage race known as the Ash people. But honestly, from there, it hits the same story beats that we have seen with the previous films. Truth be told, it is a very generic action-adventure story. You're not really going to be seeing anything different that you haven't seen in any major blockbuster or even any other James Cameron film. So then that brings us to the world of Pandora, the world of Avatar. I think that Avatar is a good opportunity at world building. I don't think that it's necessarily achieved its goals as of yet. And I think that's because a lot of the world building in Avatar feels quite soft. You know, this isn't a Tolkien-esque kind of world where everything is set in stone and we have a cause and effect for almost every event within this world's chronology. This is a pre-Empire Strikes Back Star Wars kind of world building, in that I have this fantastical world that I'm going to put out there, and then I can figure it out as I go along. I'll add in the rules to the world, and that's kind of where we are with Avatar now. The benefit, though, of that kind of world building is that when you haven't set in stone how this world operates, you're free. And then James Cameron can come with a film like this and say, I can put any old shit in here. And that's what happens. We have action scenes where there's squids fighting and whales and people are doing sign language underwater. There is no limit to where James Cameron can go with Avatar. And I like that about the films. I think that adds to the epic spectacle for this giant entertainment product, which is what it is, that follows these kind of beats that we expect from our fantasy worlds. But I think that's okay. I think it's okay to not be restricted by a strong world building aesthetic and kind of play off cliche, but then also add your own things in. He's using the base elements to tell the story of the rest of Avatar, which is fine, but when the Corporal is traveling to the Elden region and going up Death Mountain to find the Goron people, I'm not seeing anything new. I've seen it all before, and I'm okay with that. But what I do think is valuable within the Avatar films are the thematics of what the film is actually discussing. And I don't even know if James Cameron knows that the films are discussing this. To speak about any film, to speak about what it's really about, you kind of have to break down what the filmmaker or the writer was consciously aware of what they're saying. Because oftentimes they end up saying things that they may not have even anticipated that they were saying, but based on whether they were saying it subconsciously, they still often emerge within the work. They're kind of these like ancillary tertiary themes that just randomly occur during the creation of a piece of art. And I think with Avatar, if you actually try to delve into what it's talking about, I think it's talking about a lot of things. In this film, we have immaculate conceptions. In this film, we have these conversations about how race and ethnicity are relative to one's culture. Do you have to fully immerse yourself almost on the biological level in order to be at one with the culture, to fully embrace it? I don't know if James Cameron is aware that he's saying these things, but they are in there. But the central theme of Fire and Ash is a spiritual one, and it actually takes the Avatar films to a plane that they haven't been before, and it's probably the richest plane that they've been on. There is a question of religiosity within the world, and the closest comparison that we can make with the Na'vi is the same spirituality that Native Americans would have had with the relationship of oneself to nature. It takes traditional Tolkien-esque world building of different races, but then proceeds to find that there are heretics within them. Avatar shows in its fantasy world building that the races that it puts forth are generalized to certain viewpoints and certain beliefs. However, within them, with the Na'vi, with the humans, there are schisms within that. But the religious aspect of this film is something quite interesting because it doesn't pull any punches in the physical manifestations of what the divine would be in this world. And aesthetically, it adds something very unique and very valuable that you could probably say is comparable to something like a 2001. And look, I know that aesthetically I'm supposed to hate this film. Avatar has a reputation for being very, very lowbrow, for being kind of an aesthetic warning kind of film, and I don't think it is. My wife actually said when we watched the second film that a lot of this film is essentially screensavers, and that was true for the second one, less so for Fire and Ash. If I were to define what this film is aesthetically, I would say, okay, Avatar is like Dinosaur Planet in the game Star Fox Adventures. It's what it looks like, it's what it sounds like, and I like Star Fox Adventures. But Star Fox Adventures is very derivative of Zelda, and so it's not taken as seriously. I think that's kind of the cinematic equivalent of where Avatar is aesthetically. And it's very difficult not to make video game analogies when talking about Avatar because it's goofy and corny, and it's got this kind of like playful comic book gamey aesthetic. And this is also the downfall of the film because I'm defending it, but I'm aware that I'm really reaching to defend the film because there are too many aspects of the film that are just indefensible. The dialogue is shite. That spider character, that lad, I'm sorry, nothing personal, but he might be the worst actor I've seen in the last 10 years. It's so terrible. And James Cameron has this thing where from Aliens, he managed to build this rapport between his characters of a ragtag kind of team. And it's got a very 80s sensibility where he tries to insert playfulness into the seriousness of the situation, but it doesn't always work. And it's what people hate Marvel films for. It's what people hate mainstream blockbuster cinema for. But James Cameron, as an auteur, should know better than that. He should know better than to have characters talking about kicking each other's butt and shit like that. It's so bad. And also, yes, it's a story of good versus evil, but it's just so schlocky and overtly sentimental so that you can't take it seriously. The evil humans in this film are so caricaturely, outrageously evil that it doesn't border on the ridiculous. It's so ridiculous, you're almost shocked at what you're seeing. I mean, there's a group of characters that are essentially whalers, and they take such joy in the fact that they're killing these creatures. But they're not just normal whales. These are whales that have philosophy, they have art, they're the most gentle creatures. They probably developed brain surgery and rocket science. And then you just show these army of people that are so happy, so joyous to like violently murder these creatures that they may as well just be going around saying, I fucking hate nature, you slag. And so even though I do enjoy Avatar, it comes with all these caveats because there are aspects of it that I think are objectively terrible that I don't overlook, but I just accept that that's par for the course for films and works like this. I've seen plenty of blockbusters even this year. Seeing the Superman film, I thought that was terrible. But I still think the things that are in Avatar that you can kind of correlate with films of that, I don't think are as bad in Avatar as they are with some other films. And ultimately, what we still have is a film that is a completely original vision, which I would champion more no matter what. It's why now there's been kind of a renaissance or a reevaluation of the later George Lucas Star Wars trilogy. That granted, yes, maybe at the time people weren't anticipating that we were going to speak about trade routes and taxations and the politics of the world of Star Wars, but maybe that was also because the average audience wasn't as in tune with the world building that George Lucas wanted to do. And granted, this isn't to say that the new trilogy is a masterpiece of cinema and storytelling, but I think that people have looked on it a bit kinder over the years to recognize, there's an attempt at something here. And I think that people are overlooking Avatar too much for what it's attempting to do. I think that just looking at Avatar like you would an art house film, it's obviously that's not what it's trying to do. It's not what it's trying to be. It's trying to be something more, and it would be as ridiculous as trying to look at an art house film the same way that you would measure these massive blockbusters. They're completely different. So yeah, if you like Avatar films, you'll like this one. If you don't like Avatar films, you won't like this one. But in a couple years' time, I will be back again looking at Avatar 4 and Avatar 5 and probably defending them as much as I am now. The only thing is that you can say that where do we go from here? What can James Cameron now offer? We have seen a totality of a story that you can tell, but we are maybe reaching that point where Avatar is just going to be like an episodic thing. That's kind of how it feels narratively. It feels more like it's following the beats of a series of television. When series just have one self-contained story that they tell and then they move on. But what we are getting now with Avatar possibly is an idea of repetition. I think the Corporal is becoming an Albert Wesker kind of character, and Cameron might want to consider some new big reinvention if he wants to finish his so-called magnum opus.